They correct conversations others let quietly pass. They notice patterns long before anyone else reacts. They hesitate before speaking, calculating unseen consequences. Others call it brilliance, sometimes even admire it. Later, alone, the brilliance feels heavier than expected. Something underneath it does not feel like freedom. The deeper reason rarely shows itself immediately. The phrase "smart people sometimes regret being smart" describes a behavioral pattern, not a fixed identity. It refers to individuals whose heightened pattern detection creates psychological friction rather than simple advantage. Intelligence in this context is not a score or a title. It is the nervous system's tendency to simulate outcomes rapidly, to anticipate risk before others sense it approaching. What appears as overthinking is often predictive processing running at high speed, a brain scanning for threat in social nuance, tone shifts, and subtle inconsistencies. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that early humans who anticipated danger faster survived longer. Those who mentally rehearsed outcomes avoided cliffs, predators, and betrayal within tribes. In modern life, the same anticipatory machinery operates in conference rooms and relationships, scanning not for predators, but for reputational loss, rejection, or long-term instability. At a dinner table, someone makes a careless joke. Laughter erupts around the room. One person smiles faintly while already calculating how that remark could fracture alliances months later. They imagine future arguments branching outward like tree limbs, tracing conversations that have not happened yet, feeling tension from scenarios no one else can see. The room remains light, yet their chest tightens subtly, not from social anxiety alone, but from accelerated foresight running without pause. This pattern is often mistaken for pessimism, yet it is closer to cognitive vigilance, an internal rehearsal system that rarely switches off. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that heightened consciousness brings both illumination and burden. Awareness expands possibility while simultaneously magnifying contradiction. Greater analytical depth means recognizing trade-offs hidden beneath every appealing choice, perceiving the shadow attached to each opportunity. In a workplace meeting, a promotion is announced. Colleagues celebrate enthusiastically. One individual feels a split second of excitement followed by immediate projection of added responsibility and political exposure. The applause fades into a quiet inner forecast of longer hours, shifting loyalties, subtle envy from peers, invisible costs accumulating beyond the visible reward. Nothing negative has occurred externally, yet internally a ledger begins forming, columns of gain and loss filling simultaneously. This mental accounting system is adaptive. It protects against naive optimism, yet it also dilutes spontaneous joy. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that reinforcement shapes behavior powerfully. When caution prevents embarrassment or failure, the brain quietly rewards overanalysis. Each avoided mistake strengthens the predictive loop, making vigilance feel necessary, even when no immediate threat exists. Over time, intelligence becomes intertwined with control, not dominance over others, but over uncertainty itself. A friend sends a brief text message, shorter than usual. Most people would ignore the shift. One person rereads it repeatedly, examining punctuation and timing. They replay recent conversations searching for microfractures, wondering if something subtle changed tone or meaning. Hours later, the friend clarifies casually, unaware that an entire narrative unfolded in silence. The pattern is rarely visible to outsiders because it operates internally, quietly generating simulations beneath composed expressions. What others label as depth or brilliance often contains an undertone of hyper-responsibility, as if missing a signal could result in irreversible consequence. Intelligence then becomes less about superiority and more about heightened liability, the sense of being accountable for outcomes not yet formed. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl described how meaning emerges from responsibility, yet excessive responsibility without clear boundaries can morph into existential strain. When the mind perceives too many variables, it struggles to rest inside any single moment fully. At a family gathering, a minor disagreement surfaces, voices rise briefly, others shrug it off. One person tracks micro-expressions and future holiday tensions simultaneously. They predict seating arrangements months ahead, imagining which relatives will avoid eye contact next year. The argument dissolves within minutes, but the internal forecast remains active, looping quietly long after the event fades. Such intelligence does not simply gather information, it extrapolates relentlessly, projecting trajectories far beyond the present scene. This is where regret begins to whisper, not regret of knowledge itself, but of the constant mental extension beyond what is happening. The pattern promises preparedness, yet delivers chronic anticipation, a subtle distance from uncomplicated participation. What looks like gifted perception may also be a survival adaptation shaped by earlier environments where missing cues carried real cost. And the origin of that adaptation formed long before adult awareness, waits beneath the surface, shaping the mind more than most realize. Sometimes awareness feels less like power and more like a weight quietly carried. If you're still watching, you probably notice things most people miss. You question behavior. You look beneath the surface. If that sounds like you, subscribe. This channel was made for minds like yours. Long before intelligence became admired, it functioned as protection, a child's nervous system learning to scan unpredictability with quiet precision. In early environments where moods shifted abruptly, pattern recognition was not academic strength, it was insurance against emotional whiplash. A raised eyebrow at the dinner table, a sudden silence in the hallway, a door closing slightly harder than usual, these became data points. The child learned to decode tone before content, posture before language, predicting emotional weather to avoid internal storms. Evolutionary psychology suggests the brain prioritizes social belonging as survival currency. Exclusion once meant vulnerability to danger and scarcity. For a perceptive child, noticing micro changes in caregivers increased safety. Anticipating disappointment or anger reduced the shock of impact. In a living room heavy with unspoken tension, homework is completed flawlessly without being asked, not from perfectionism alone, but from strategic compliance. The report card becomes armor, academic excellence serving as a stabilizer within unstable emotional climates. Praise arrives inconsistently, yet achievement reliably reduces friction, reinforcing the association between intelligence and safety. Behavioral conditioning embeds itself quietly. Performance decreases threat, anticipation reduces surprise, vigilance becomes identity. In school corridors, teachers admire quick answers and advanced vocabulary. Classmates oscillate between admiration and subtle distance. The child learns that being ahead intellectually can isolate socially, yet withdrawing would feel even more dangerous. So a delicate balance forms, speaking just enough to be valued, withholding enough to avoid resentment. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that adaptations formed in childhood often solidify into adult personality, even when the original environment has long disappeared. The hyper-aware child becomes the adult who reads rooms instinctively, who senses conflict before it surfaces. In a classroom presentation, a student notices classmates whispering in the back row, heart rate increases slightly, mind races through interpretations instantly. Are they bored, critical, amused? The brain cycles possibilities rapidly, long before the teacher notices anything. Later it is revealed they were discussing unrelated plans, yet the anticipatory surge lingers as bodily memory. The nervous system does not distinguish clearly between imagined social threat and confirmed rejection. It responds to simulation as if real. Neuroscientists describe predictive coding as the brain's default mode, constantly forecasting the next moment to minimize surprise. For some individuals, this forecasting becomes exceptionally detailed because earlier unpredictability demanded precision. A parent once changed plans without warning, praise once turned into criticism abruptly, affection once cooled without explanation. The child responded by sharpening observation, tightening cognitive control, learning to live one step ahead emotionally. This is not pathology, it is adaptation, a mind sculpted by context to detect instability before it escalates. In adolescence, intellectual depth becomes refuge, books offering structured worlds where cause and effect feel reliable. While peers experiment impulsively, one teenager calculates reputational fallout and long-term consequence with uncomfortable clarity. They decline invitations not from disinterest alone, but from foresight of social complexity and potential humiliation. Evolutionary psychologists note that status hierarchies in adolescence mimic tribal dynamics, where missteps can mean temporary exclusion. A highly analytical mind senses these hierarchies acutely, perceiving invisible rankings others ignore. At a lunch table, laughter erupts after a sarcastic comment. One student instantly maps alliances, predicting who will shift loyalty by semester's end. This cognitive mapping offers strategic advantage, yet it also seeds quiet exhaustion. Over time, intelligence intertwines with hyper-accountability, the belief that careful anticipation prevents relational rupture. If a conflict emerges, the mind replays conversations searching for missed cues, assuming responsibility for not predicting accurately enough. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl described how humans seek meaning through interpretation, yet constant interpretation can transform life into relentless analysis. The adult who once monitored parental mood now monitors partner microexpressions, colleague email tone, friend response latency. The original environment may no longer be volatile, but the internal algorithm remains active. In a calm relationship, a delayed reply still triggers subtle cognitive escalation because history taught that delay might signal withdrawal. The partner eventually responds warmly, unaware of the silent spiral that unfolded. Thus, intelligence becomes entangled with vigilance, not because of arrogance or superiority, but because early unpredictability trained the mind to stay ahead. The regret that surfaces later is not about being capable. It is about never fully switching off the internal forecast. What began as protection now shapes social behavior quietly, influencing how connection feels in adult life. And as this pattern enters friendships, romance, workplaces, and power structures, it reveals itself in ways others first notice from the outside. In adulthood, the pattern becomes visible first to others, long before it is consciously recognized within. Friends describe someone as intense, analytical, occasionally distant, admiring their insight while sensing something slightly inaccessible beneath it. At a small gathering, conversation drifts casually between weekend stories. One person subtly redirects dialogue toward underlying motives and long-term implications. Laughter softens into thoughtful silence. Others nod politely, unsure why the mood feels heavier than moments before. What was meant as depth lands as gravity, not because of malice, but because the analytical lens rarely relaxes. In friendships, this often appears as relentless perspective-taking, seeing both sides of every disagreement simultaneously. Two friends argue about a misunderstanding. One storms out dramatically, another vents passionately. The analytical observer outlines structural miscommunication calmly. Their clarity diffuses immediate tension, yet neither friend feels fully validated. Emotional alignment quietly sacrificed for intellectual balance. The observer later senses subtle distance forming, not hostility, but a cooling that logic cannot entirely mend. In romantic relationships, the pattern intensifies, intimacy amplifying predictive processing. A partner expresses mild frustration after a long day, words simple and fleeting, yet the analytical mind extrapolates future dissatisfaction. Within minutes, a map of potential relational decline unfolds internally, branching into imagined breakups and solitary futures. Externally, the response remains composed, measured reassurance delivered with articulate precision. Internally, the nervous system prepares for loss that has not occurred. Partners may initially feel deeply understood, almost clinically seen, as if nothing about them escapes notice. Over time, that same perceptiveness can feel like surveillance, a subtle sense of being continuously interpreted. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that intense consciousness can cast long shadows in relationships, awareness illuminating but also dissecting connection. At work, the pattern often earns praise, strategic thinking valued in environments driven by competition and metrics. In a strategy meeting, colleagues debate impulsively. One person remains quiet until presenting a comprehensive analysis of market risks and hidden variables. The room grows attentive, impressed by the foresight and layered reasoning offered calmly. Later, alone at a desk, that same individual replays the meeting, scrutinizing their own phrasing, searching for overlooked implications. Recognition from peers feels brief, because the internal audit resumes immediately. Supervisors may rely heavily on this person during crises, trusting their anticipatory skills. Yet reliance can morph into invisible pressure, the expectation to foresee problems before they materialize. When an unforeseen complication arises, self-criticism activates sharply, as if intelligence failed its primary duty. In family systems, the role becomes even more entrenched. During a holiday dinner, tension surfaces between relatives over politics, voices sharpen slightly, forks pause mid-air. One family member intervenes diplomatically, reframing statements with nuanced context, diffusing escalation skillfully. The room settles. Conversation resumes cautiously, gratitude expressed subtly through relieved smiles. Later, that mediator feels curiously depleted, as if having absorbed emotional shockwaves unnoticed by others. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that within tribes, certain individuals acted as strategic observers, monitoring group stability. In modern families and organizations, similar roles emerge informally, filled by those whose cognitive vigilance is strongest. From the outside, this appears as competence and maturity. From the inside, it can feel like perpetual responsibility for emotional climate. Socially, people first comment on the surface traits, describing someone as overly serious, intimidating, or occasionally aloof. Rarely do they recognize the underlying adaptation, the protective forecasting system running continuously beneath social performance. A group of friends plans a spontaneous trip. Enthusiasm spreads quickly, bookings discussed impulsively. One person hesitates, calculating financial strain, potential conflicts, logistical breakdowns months ahead. Their cautious input is met with playful eye rolls, labeled overthinking lightly. The trip proceeds. Minor issues arise exactly as predicted, yet satisfaction and accuracy feels hollow rather than triumphant. Being right does not equal relief. It reinforces the expectation to anticipate everything. Midway through adult life, some begin to sense the quiet cost, an awareness that constant foresight has shaped their relational texture. Connection feels filtered through analysis, closeness mediated by prediction. Others still admire the intelligence, still rely on the clarity, unaware of the internal weight attached. And in a culture increasingly structured around visibility, speed, and comparison, this pattern does not fade. It intensifies quietly under modern pressures. Modern systems quietly reward constant cognitive anticipation, amplifying vigilance into a near-permanent state of alertness. Digital platforms operate on prediction and comparison, mirroring the analytical mind's instinct to forecast outcomes before they unfold. Notifications arrive unpredictably, each vibration a micro-uncertainty, prompting immediate interpretation of tone, intent, and implication. A message appears without punctuation, brief and efficient. The analytical brain scans it for hidden dissatisfaction or passive aggression. Seconds stretch into speculative narratives, long before a clarifying reply dissolves imagined tension. Technology compresses response time, rewarding those who react quickly and think ahead of trends. In professional spaces, foresight becomes currency. Anticipating market shifts and reputational risk elevates status. An employee drafts contingency plans before projects officially launch, mapping scenarios colleagues have not yet considered. Leadership praises the preparedness, reinforcing the belief that scanning for threat is virtuous and necessary. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that intermittent reinforcement strengthens habits powerfully, and modern feedback systems operate intermittently. Sometimes hyper-analysis prevents embarrassment publicly, sometimes it appears excessive. The unpredictability itself deepens the loop. Social media further magnifies comparative intelligence, exposing individuals to endless displays of curated achievement. Scrolling through accomplishments of peers, the analytical mind calculates timelines, opportunity costs, alternate life paths diverging silently. A promotion announcement triggers not envy alone, but rapid evaluation of personal trajectory against imagined benchmarks. The brain constructs parallel futures continuously, each one slightly more optimized than the present. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that modern individuals risk over-identifying with mental constructs, mistaking internal narratives for lived reality. In online discourse, nuanced thinking is often compressed into polarized statements, yet the analytical mind continues generating complexity privately. An individual types a carefully layered comment, then deletes it repeatedly, anticipating misinterpretation from multiple angles. Silence feels safer than exposure, yet also isolating. Cultural incentives prize intellectual sharpness publicly, debates celebrated as performance rather than dialogue. Those adept at dissecting arguments gain visibility, followers, influence, reinforcing analytical dominance. Behind the scenes, the same individuals may experience decision fatigue, as constant evaluation erodes simplicity. At night, lying in darkness, the mind replays interactions from the day, adjusting phrasing internally as if editing a film. Sleep arrives slowly, because predictive processing continues without external stimulus. Neuroscience suggests that chronic anticipation activates stress pathways subtly, even absent immediate danger. The body cannot easily distinguish between imagined social failure and physical threat. Cortisol rises regardless. Modern life rarely offers cognitive silence. Information streams endlessly, inviting continuous interpretation. A news alert flashes about economic instability. The analytical brain projects personal financial scenarios years ahead instantly. Though nothing in the room has changed physically, the internal atmosphere tightens. In creative fields, intelligence becomes both asset and obstacle. An artist conceptualizes multiple innovative directions simultaneously, yet hesitates to commit, aware of alternative possibilities potentially superior. The abundance of imagined options paralyzes execution quietly. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that in ancestral contexts options were limited and concrete. Modern abundance overwhelms predictive systems evolved for scarcity. Choice overload feeds analysis. Analysis delays action. Delay reinforces self-scrutiny. From the outside, this appears as perfectionism or indecision. Internally, it feels like attempting to select one future while vividly perceiving 10 others. Corporate cultures encourage optimization relentlessly, metrics tracking performance, productivity apps quantifying output. The intelligent mind absorbs these signals intensely, translating them into internal standards that rarely feel satisfied. Achievements momentarily reduce tension, then new variables emerge demanding evaluation. The hidden cost surfaces gradually, not as dramatic breakdown, but as quiet erosion of spontaneous presence. Moments that once might have been experienced directly are filtered through strategic assessment. Intelligence, once forged for survival in unpredictable environments, now operates in ecosystems engineered to stimulate it continuously. The adaptation becomes amplified beyond its original function, vigilance rewarded publicly while straining privately. And somewhere beneath the accolades and strategic advantages, a deeper awareness begins forming, subtle and unsettling, waiting to be faced without distraction. Eventually, the individual recognizes the pattern not as brilliance alone, but as a structure shaping perception continuously. This recognition does not arrive dramatically. It surfaces in quiet moments when achievement feels strangely insufficient. At a celebration dinner, glasses clink and congratulations echo warmly, yet a subtle detachment lingers beneath the smile. While others savor accomplishment, the analytical mind scans ahead toward the next threshold, already mapping potential decline. The joy is present, yet partially diluted by foresight. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl described the human capacity to step outside immediate experience and observe it, a gift that can also estrange. In solitude, awareness sharpens further, not as panic, but as clinical clarity. Intelligence is seen not as identity, but as a strategy once necessary, now operating automatically. Memories surface of childhood rooms where silence carried tension, of classrooms where being prepared reduced vulnerability. The pattern connects backward quietly, forming a continuous thread from early vigilance to adult cognition. In a relationship, a partner laughs freely at an unexpected inconvenience, adapting fluidly without forecasting catastrophe. The analytical observer notices the contrast, recognizing how rarely their own mind permits such unguarded ease. No resentment arises, only a muted awareness of difference. At work, a colleague makes a spontaneous decision that succeeds despite limited preparation. The analytical mind acknowledges the outcome while simultaneously listing variables that could have derailed it. Success does not invalidate caution, yet it exposes the narrow corridor within which comfort exists. Psychologist Carl Jung suggested that what remains unconscious directs behavior until brought into awareness. Here awareness is present, yet the mechanism persists. During a quiet evening walk, city lights reflecting softly on pavement, thoughts continue structuring hypothetical futures automatically. Even beauty becomes material for projection, apartments imagined, careers recalculated, conversations rehearsed. The individual senses how intelligence extends beyond utility into atmosphere, tinting perception subtly. Friends still describe them as insightful, reliable, impressively thoughtful. Rarely do they see the internal negotiation occurring beneath each response. A family member expresses disappointment casually. The analytical mind absorbs it fully, dissecting tone, context, history. Hours later, the comment echoes internally, examined from multiple perspectives long after the speaker has forgotten it. Awareness of this loop grows sharper with time. It becomes evident that regret is not about intelligence itself, but about the cost of perpetual anticipation. Evolutionary psychologists remind us that adaptations persist even when environments change. The brain does not easily relinquish strategies that once ensured belonging and safety. In a quiet room before sleep, the mind simulates future conversations once more, subtle adjustments made to imagined phrasing. There is no crisis occurring, only rehearsal. The body remains still, yet internally scenarios unfold with cinematic detail. The recognition settles gently. Intelligence has functioned as shield, compass, and early warning system. It has also narrowed the field of unfiltered experience. Moments of simple presence appear rarer not because they are impossible, but because prediction intervenes reflexively. No dramatic conclusion emerges from this realization. The pattern continues operating, even as it is observed. Awareness does not dismantle it instantly, it simply illuminates its contours. The individual sees how admiration from others coexists with private fatigue, how foresight protects while quietly isolating. In that recognition, there is neither condemnation nor triumph. Only the understanding that what once ensured survival now shapes perception in ways both advantageous and heavy. And so the mind remains brilliant and vigilant, carrying insight like a lantern that also casts a long and restless shadow.